Welcome or welcome back to Info Vault. Today, we will be discussing the Stanford prison experiment, when ordinary people turned cruel. In the summer of 1971, a quiet university campus in California became home to one of the most infamous psychology studies ever conducted. It was supposed to last 2 weeks. Instead, it collapsed in just 6 days. And what it revealed about human behavior still haunts us today. This is the story of the Stanford prison experiment. To understand why this study even happened, we have to go back to the late 1960s and early 70s. America was in turmoil. Protests over the Vietnam War, civil rights struggles, and a growing distrust of authority. Psychologists were asking new questions about power, obedience, and conformity. One of those psychologists was Dr. Philip Zimbardo, a professor at Stanford University. Zimbardo wanted to study the psychological effects of being a prisoner or a guard, not in theory, not in a classroom, but in a simulated, real environment. So he came up with an idea that would blur the lines between science and reality. Zimbardo placed an ad in the Palo Alto newspaper. It quoted male college students needed for a study of prison life, $15 per day. Over 70 students applied. They went through interviews and psychological screenings. Eventually, 24 were selected. All of them were considered stable, healthy, and average. The participants didn't know what was coming. The students were randomly assigned roles. Half became guards, the others prisoners. The guards received khaki uniforms, whistles, and wooden batons. They also got mirrored sunglasses, designed to hide their eyes and strip away personal connection. The prisoners, on the other hand, were stripped naked, sprayed with disinfectant, and given ill-fitting smocks with numbers on them. No names, no individuality, just numbers. The basement of Stanford's psychology building was converted into a mock prison. Bars on doors, small cells, and even a solitary confinement closet. It was supposed to feel real. And it did. The prisoners weren't simply told to show up at the lab. No, local Palo Alto police helped with the illusion. Without warning, students were arrested at their homes. Sirens, handcuffs, neighbors watching as they were shoved into police cars. They were booked, fingerprinted, and blindfolded. By the time they arrived at Stanford's basement prison, they were already stripped of their identities. And the guards were waiting. Day 1. Uneasy calm. The first day was relatively quiet. Guards weren't sure how far to go. Prisoners were confused, embarrassed, and uncomfortable. But by the end of the day, the atmosphere was already shifting. Guards began testing boundaries. Prisoners started to realize this wasn't just a role-play game. Day 2. Rebellion. On the second day, the prisoners snapped. They barricaded themselves inside their cells using beds. They refused to obey orders. They shouted at the guards. The guards retaliated. They used fire extinguishers to blast the prisoners. They forced them out, stripped them naked, and removed their beds entirely. What shocked everyone was how quickly things escalated. These weren't hardened criminals. They were college kids. But the power dynamic was already changing them. Humiliation and control. From that point on, the guards grew crueler. They invented punishments. They made prisoners do push-ups, sometimes stepping on their backs while they did them. They withheld basic comforts. No blankets, no sleep, no food for some. One guard later admitted, "I started to see the prisoners as animals. I didn't even feel like they were people anymore." Some guards went even further, using psychological tactics. They made prisoners chant numbers, degrade each other, and turn against one another. It was no longer an experiment. It was a nightmare. Day 3. Breaking down. By day 3, cracks were showing. One prisoner, known as number 8612, began screaming, crying, and cursing uncontrollably. He begged to be released. Zimbardo initially thought he was faking it, trying to manipulate the system. But when it became clear he was on the verge of a full breakdown, Number 8612 was released. The others? They had to stay. Day 4, deepening the divide. Guards became bolder, prisoners became weaker. Some prisoners started accepting their roles, even siding with guards against other inmates. The line between play acting and reality was gone. One prisoner went on a hunger strike. Guards punished him by throwing him into solitary confinement, a tiny closet barely big enough to move. The psychological pressure was immense. Day 5, the abuse continues. By now, guards were in full control. They humiliated prisoners, forced them to clean toilets with bare hands, and deprived them of sleep. Zimbardo himself, the man running the study, became so absorbed in the role of prison superintendent that he lost sight of his duty as a researcher. The abuse was no longer just data, it was real harm. Day 6, the end. It wasn't until a young graduate student, Christina Maslach, visited the experiment that someone truly saw how bad it had become. She was horrified at the conditions. She told Zimbardo, "What you're doing to these boys is terrible." That was the wake-up call. After just 6 days, the Stanford prison experiment was shut down. The aftermath. The study had been designed to last 2 weeks. It didn't even make it halfway. The results, however, were unforgettable. Ordinary students, healthy, stable young men, had been transformed by their roles. Guards became cruel. Prisoners became submissive and broken. Zimbardo concluded that people conform to social roles quickly, especially when those roles involve power and control. But not everyone agreed. The controversy. The experiment has been criticized heavily. Some say Zimbardo encouraged the guards to act aggressively, influencing the results. Others argue it was deeply unethical, traumatizing students without proper consent. Still, it became one of the most cited studies in psychology, alongside Milgram's obedience experiment, where people shocked strangers simply because an authority figure told them to. The message was the same. In the right environment, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary cruelty. The legacy. The Stanford prison experiment has influenced law enforcement training, films, books, and even debates on human rights. It forces us to ask, how much of our behavior is shaped by who we are, and how much by the situation we're placed in? So here's the haunting question. If you were one of those 24 college kids in 1971, would you have stood up against the abuse? Or would you have been swept into the role, as a broken prisoner or as a cruel guard? If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to subscribe to InfoVault, hit the like button, and tap the notification bell so you never miss more deep dives into psychology and mysteries. And let me know in the comments. Do you think the Stanford prison experiment revealed the truth about human behavior, or was it just an unethical study gone too far? Thanks for tuning in today's story time. Until next time.